Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our media and stakeholder event today at our global headquarters here in Mannheim, Germany. Thanks all for being here. It's great to see so many people here in the room with us, and also great to see that we have a large number of people joining us online for the session today. We've got a great agenda. I'm going to be your host for today. My name's Tom Armitage, and I lead communications for Crop Science, and we're going to be walking you through what I think is going to be a very, very exciting and insightful morning and afternoon of programming here. So to give you a sense of what we've got in store, first and foremost, we are obviously pleased to release the results of our first ever Farmer Voice survey. So earlier this year, we set out to uncover some of the things that were on the minds of farmers around the world. So we polled farmers in 8 countries, same set of questions, asking them about some of their challenges, some of their experiences, their concerns, their hopes, their fears, to see what they could tell us and what their voice told us about the future of farming. So we're going to be sharing those results and going into deeper detail with you today on those. And also some exciting developments, what's going on within crop science itself. So today, we're also here to listen and talk to very important stakeholders, both from the customer side, our farmers, who we are going to hear from in just one moment on a panel with me, where we can explore some of the findings of the Farmer Voice survey together. And then also we've got a number of guests who are going to share their thoughts and insights, also from the world of stakeholder affairs, from our international multilateral organizations, also talking about the perspective of farming and farming in the future. I'm excited about what they've got to say to us, and we're going to kick off with Rodrigo Santos, who is our president of Crop Science, who I'll invite up here in just a few minutes. We're then going to follow through, as I said, with a panel featuring our 4 farmers from 4 different areas in the world to give us 4 different perspectives on farming and deep diving into some of the surveys, some of the results that we see in the Farmer Voice survey. And then, as I said, the third segment will be our panel of multilateral and multinational organizations, representatives from those organizations that we'll be able to talk to as well, focusing on the challenges of today and the opportunities of tomorrow. We're going to wrap up then after that with some reflections from colleagues, and then we'll take lunch. For those that are then here in Mannheim physically with us today, we're going to take a walk over to our R&D labs and have a little bit of a deeper dive into our greenhouse facilities. We've got a couple of experiences there for you. The first, our veg seeds colleagues are going to be taking you through their very dynamic business and sharing some of the latest happenings that are going on their side, including an acquisition that we also announced just this morning that should be in your press kits. And they're going to be able to give you some delicious samples of that acquisition. I'll give the game away. It's about strawberries, so leave some space for those. You'll enjoy those strawberries with the veg seeds colleagues. And then you'll also be hearing from some of our other research and development leaders here on site. They're going to be talking to you about exciting technology that we have, a system that we are calling Crop Key, which really is the next generation of crop protection solutions. They're going to be able to walk you through what that's all about and give you a sense of how it meets both the needs of our farmers and also the needs of society. So a lot of different elements, a lot of learnings. We're very excited to kind of give you the chance to deep dive into these areas. Please take the opportunity when you have it, speak to the Bayer leaders who are around. You will have opportunities for conversations with them through the course of the day. So please, direct your questions in those sessions to them. But also during the panels, we'll take some of your questions as well as questions from online. So with that, I will say thank you very much and hand over to Rodrigo.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Good morning. Thanks for being here with us today. Thanks for the ones that are following us on the web. Pleasure to have you here in our site. Really, I'm excited about today. You're gonna see some of the. We made just an announcement recently that we're gonna invest 220 million euros on this site. You're gonna see a little bit of how we are using artificial intelligence to design the new solutions for the farmers in the future here. So I hope that for the ones that are here, that we will have the opportunity to see that live there. And also, as Tom just mentioned, the recent announcement of our strawberry investment as well. So really cool. We are excited to have here. But today is more about the farmers and the farmer voice, some of the work that was done recently in surveying farmers globally to give them the stage to talk about the future of agriculture. So today is a lot about them. It's a lot about them. We're going to just help facilitate. Bayer here is willing to do that, but I'm very excited that you're going to have the opportunity to listen directly from the farmers, engage with them, and just for a very important reason, And when we think about some of the key challenges that you know very well, but I just want to reinforce again, we are talking that we're going to add 2.2 billion people in this planet. I just want to mention that number again because it's so impressive, right? We're going to add 2.2 billion people in this planet. And according to FAO, we're going to need to produce 50% more food and feed. 50% more food and feed what that's produced today. And in 20% less land per capita than we use today. Because in the end of the day, it's very two important elements, right? We need to produce more, and we need to restore more. We're going to need to deal with two key challenges that society is facing, is food production, food security, and mitigating climate change. And agriculture can be part of that solution. That is what is amazing, and we are excited that innovation, science can drive agriculture to be part of the solution for these two key challenges that we have. But in the end of the day, who will deal with that challenge are the farmers. And we are here to help, to support them, but they are at the stage of dealing with that. And I really hope that you enjoy the farmer voice, because some of the elements that we capture from that farmer voice survey is really amazing. When we say that we need to produce 50% more food and feed while in 20% less land per capita that we do today, and also dealing with some of the impact of the climate change, because climate change for us, when we live in the cities, is one thing, but for the farmers, is impacting their yields, it's impacting their production, it's impacting their ability to produce food and feed, and it's so important to do that. So that's why I'm so glad to be here. By the way, this is the best part of my job. I love to talk with farmers. Since I started my career 28 years ago, I started working with the farmers, and just recently I had the opportunity to talk with some of them. Very close to here, Bernhard Oleg, a farmer in Germany, that he's the 6th generation farmer, and we were talking about soil health, and we were talking about restoring more regenerative agriculture, our vision about the future of agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and we were talking about soil health, the importance of that. And of course, for Bern, the farmer, he said, Rodrigo, this is the most important thing that I have on my farm. This is what I got from my father. This is what I will give to my son, is the soil and the soil health. And this is one of the things that we captured on the survey as well, that farmers are not only willing, but they are driving regenerative agriculture for the future. So that was one element that was really striking. Recently, 2 months ago, I was in India with the farmers, with the rice farmers there, and it's amazing to be there because probably one of the elements that is striking me, when you think about rice, we're talking about 140 million hectares of rice in Asia, and shifting from the traditional way of producing rice for the future of direct seed rice, and how can you produce more rice, conserve water, reduce methane emissions, carbon emissions, increase biodiversity, improve soil health. It's a major transformation of the system, and again, drive by the farmers. And the most recent one that I had a pleasure to be months ago, I was in Kenya, visiting the countryside of Kenya, and Mama J, another farmer that I met there. I just wish we could be doing this event there, because when we talk about food security, it's one thing to talk here about food security, another thing is when you are in the countryside of Kenya, talking with the small farmers, and how Mama J was using new hybrids and technologies to really not only be able to feed her family, but also to provide for the community around that. That's a major impact that it's something that really, for me personally, is makes sense of everything that we do in our sites, in our work, in our research. So really excited to hear from them. They are the ones that will drive and will transform the food system in the future. They are the ones that will do regenerative agriculture. They are the ones that will make this planet a planet that we can feed the population, and so critical, so important at the same time that we can mitigate climate change. So thank you very much for being here today. I think that will be a unique, and I see Pedro here as well, Keep Tom, some of the farmers that I had the pleasure to work with during all those years, and I hope that you enjoy. This farmer voice for us was really critical because one of the things that I miss a lot when I go to Davos or to other forums, we have the government officials, we have NGOs, we have private companies like us talking about future of agriculture, but I'll always miss the farmers on the table. And it's so important. They are the drivers of that. So thank you very much. I hope that you enjoy the day here, and we're going to make everything possible to make a very effective day for you. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Rodrigo, for that introduction. In 1 minute, we're going to get started into that panel discussion with our farmers. But first, we wanted to share with you a quick video which summarizes the Farmer Voice survey and gives you a flavor of what some of those farmers are talking about, including some of the farmers in the room with us today.
The future of my farming is promising. Using modern technology, I will be able to increase my earnings.
With the advancement of technology and the continuous renewal of agricultural technology, the future feels more optimistic.
In the future, farming on our family's farm will be a mix of old and new.
Utilizing new technology has been a key to our success.
We have sustainability initiatives in place and have achieved many goals with waste minimization, water saving and energy saving.
The future prospects of farming for me will revolve around leveraging digital technologies to increase output and help mitigate risks.
If we cannot save our soil, that will affect food security for more people. We need to get access to new technologies.
I hope my children will farm in harmony with the environment.
But our base is the food. If we will not get food in stomach, then nothing will work.
We are completely sure that we are part of the solution, not part of the problem.
I hope those outside of agriculture don't lose patience and forget to listen to the voice of the farmer.
Great, so giving you a little bit of a flavor there of the voices from the farmers that we surveyed, but now I'd like to actually welcome 4 farmers to join us on the panel today. These are 4 of the 500 million or so farmers around the world working on these challenges and opportunities every day, arguably the most important job that anyone can have in the world. So let me welcome Scott Henry, Marcus Holtkötter, Patience Koku, and Pedro Vigneault. Please come and join me up here. Guys. So thank you very much indeed and welcome. Let me just give a very brief introduction. Scott, from the United States, you're a 4th generation farmer, grain and livestock in Iowa, the heartland, I guess, of US grain belt. Marcus from Germany. Marcus's family has been farming for 10 generations, raising hogs, wheat, corn, canola, and barley. Patience from Nigeria, thanks for joining us. Patience has been farming since 2012, and you raise maize, seed, grain, bananas, and you have a poultry operation as well. And Pedro from Argentina. Pedro is a 5th generation farmer who runs his family operation together with members of your family, and you're also very active in regional politics as well. So some great perspectives, 4 different regions, 4 different countries from around the world, and really looking forward to getting into this debate with you. So we're going to have some time for some questions during this session, so please, if you are online, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We've got folks here looking out for those coming through, and in the room, if you have questions when we get to it, please just raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone. If we don't get to all your questions, take a chance in the break to follow up. Okay, so to get us started here, I'd like to ask you all, just give us a quick snapshot of, if you imagine you were back on your farm this morning and not sitting here in a room with me, what's going on right now? What are the things foremost in your minds, on your farms, in your operations today, do you think? Scott?
So today we would actually be harvesting, and so my brother and my dad we'd be running the combines and picking corn or soybeans at the moment. So for us, that would be what we'd be doing.
Pretty busy day then.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Marcus, maybe from you.
So we are at the moment preparing the fields for seeding winter barley and winter wheat, and maybe in 3 weeks we will start with corn harvest.
Okay, great. So a critical moment, patience.
Well, we're harvesting bananas today. We do that weekly on the farm, and then we are still, waiting for the corn to dry out. And we're planting cowpea, BT cowpea. So pretty excited about that.
Okay, great. Thanks, patience. Pedro.
Well, if it's early in the morning, you will hear the birds singing in the farm, first of all.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And then these days it's amazing in Argentina because it's springtime. And Mother Nature says, I'm here, I'm back. So it's the best part of the year in our farm, where calves are being born these days as well. And we are planting corn and soybeans these days.
Excellent. Maybe let's stay with you, Pedro, and that picture that you painted. I mean, I think we tried to get some nice weather also here in Monheim this morning. As I was driving here, I noticed we had a beautiful sunrise today. It was a very gorgeous start to the day. Made me think, weather is just such an important critical factor in everything that you do on your farms. And when we talk to the farmers in our survey, I mean, absolutely weather change, climate change is foremost in their minds. I mean, just a couple of stats here. 70% of those farmers we talked to said they'd experienced some kind of heat or drought experience. There was an overall income loss of around 16% on average from weather-related impacts. 31% reported seeing fluctuation from one extreme to another. Without doubt, we're seeing those extremes. Tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing on your farm.
Well, last year was quite a year on that issue. We have this big drought, the biggest drought in the last 60 years. The country was hidden, but all around the country. Also, we have this frost, this late frost. So it was quite a year. It's really difficult. In our country, in our farm, the yields were half what they used to be, but some farmers didn't yield at all. So it's really tough. Climate these days is the great issue for us.
Absolutely, and I think, Scott, you and I were talking earlier on, you also had some fairly extreme conditions on your farm as well in Iowa. Can you tell us a little bit more about those? What was so unusual? What was so different?
We've seen in the last 3 years, multiple 1-in-100-year weather events, whether it be a derecho, which is an inland hurricane, flattening 100% of our corn crop in 2020 and causing over $1 million of damage to our grain facilities, to similar drought as well as in springtime rains that limit our ability to get to the field timely. And so the weather volatility and variability is definitely increasing.
Mm-hmm. So you can obviously, concur with those in the report that are saying they're seeing those extreme moments as well. I mean, again, statistics from the survey, we saw 70% of farmers surveyed agreed climate change has already had a large impact on their farm. Smallholders, 97% of those smallholders we polled in India say they're experiencing changing weather, and 42% of them see reduced yield expected due to climate change. Maybe Marcus and then Patience. Marcus first. I mean, from a German perspective, again, I mean, we've had a pretty crazy summer here in Germany as well. I mean, maybe you can share a point of view on those weather patterns, but then also maybe your perspective on climate change too and how it impacts you.
Yeah, this year was extreme. So we start with a very wet winter. So there was no chance to start with fertilizing the winter crops. And also with beginning with seeding corn. And after seeding corn, we get this spring dry like the last years. And then it comes that in the middle of wheat harvest, we get more than 4 weeks rain.
Yep.
So the wheat and the canola germinates in the field.
Yep.
So that's it was a mess. It was terrible to see that.
Yep.
What's happened there on the field. A lot of wheat goes to biogas plants. So that's you cannot use it for human feeding. It's only for feed for animals. It cannot be used. So that goes to the biogas plant. So that's no way for normal. So that I see climate change has a big impact to our farms in our area too. So I think that the spring in early spring, this raw, since 5-6 years, it becomes more and more normal. And now this year we see it's totally changed with the rain.
Right. Thank you for that perspective. Patience, can you bring us a perspective from Africa as well? I mean, we've got a common pattern here, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm happy that Rodrigo was in Kenya. I think if farming in rural Africa is similar in many parts. And more so in a continent where the conversation is not really about climate change. We don't really fully realize the effect it has on the production that we have that is already plagued by many challenges. So I'll give an example. We were growing BT cowpea to be sold to farmers last year. And we had a perfect crop. So people were brought from Mozambique, Kenya, and a few other countries, Ethiopia, to see the value of BT cowpea. And it was an amazing crop, but the rain lasted too long. And so we lost about 80% of that yield. And then this year, we came into the year hopeful. The rain came late, and then it's going early, and in between, it's sparse. So there's drought. So it's just so much chaos, really, for the farmer. And then when you're already dealing with lack of access to technology, mechanization, and all of that, it's kind of like a little too much.
Yeah. Just a point there. So when you talk about BT, you're talking about biotech?
Yes.
Yeah.
GM cowpea, the first grown in the world. We are pioneering that in Nigeria, and so we're very optimistic about the future.
Fantastic, great. Yeah. Thank you so much. So really makes you think, really makes you reflect. I think that, obviously there is a very changing situation here. We're going to get into maybe some of the solutions, the technologies, the approaches that we can take to combat that in just one moment. But I think one of the questions that I'd ask you, just as we sort of set out this scene for the folks in the room here, a question that came in online, actually. How would you describe how your farm coexists with native wildlife and habitats? Maybe we just take that kind of a little bit broadly as another sort of opening idea. I mean, obviously, the farms that you're operating in, the farms that you're running, I'm assuming, can only continue to exist if you keep nature in fine balance. Maybe you can just give us a little bit of a picture, each of you as well, as you think about your farms, how you're kind of trying to keep that balance between the natural and, well, all of it's natural, but trying to keep that balance.
I'm a fourth generation farmer, and so I think the farmer voice that you heard in the video talking about the soil that he inherited is what he hopes to pass on. And so, we view land stewardship and the soil health as nature, as part of nature for our farm. And so the more that we can use what Mother Nature gives us naturally, the better. And so for us, that's where we're seeing ourselves implement practices that allow us to truly do that. And so in a way, you could say that we are trying to go back to being supportive of that relative to some of the more traditional practices that have been in our industry. But at the same time, we're also at a unique moment where the innovations and new technologies that are coming, I think, allow us to do that in an even larger way. And so when I think personally about our farm, we're able to take atmospheric nitrogen to feed our plants because of the microbiome and the new technologies around biologicals. And so for us to think about what Mother Nature gives us and how we can interact with her in our farming practices. That's the boots on the ground experience that we're having.
So these would be biologicals that are helping capture nitrogen, helping the plant sort of feed itself with the nutrients that it needs effectively. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Maybe also a perspective from you, Pedro, on that one as well. The balance of nature, can technology support you in
Yes, sure. First, you have the environment that you see, you smell, you hear. No, we are working with all that, of course. I speak about the birds that we hear in our farm. But I want to focus on microbiology. No? That's a really impressive environment. In 1 grain of soil, you have 10,000 million living organisms. In 1 grain. You have more living organisms there than people all around the earth. In 1 grain, 400,000 different species. That is what we are dealing with. We are measuring that. We are starting to measure that. For me, I'm really proud to say that in many aspects, I will leave to my children better soils than the one that I received from our parents. No? So we are focusing on this environment that we cannot see, but it is there. And it's what is giving us resiliency to climate change or whatever. No, so it's a big partner that we have there, and we need to work, we need to focus, and we are doing that. It's amazing.
Great, thank you. I don't know, Patience, Marcus, you've got perspectives on the balance of nature on your farms as well?
Absolutely, I do. And I think that for me, I always wondered why the yields were so poor in my country, right? And I was more thinking along the lines of put in more nitrogen, put in more input. And then one day I sat next to a colleague of Pedro's from APRISEED. And he told me about the fact that it was the soil that needed to be regenerated. This was about 5 years ago. And I went back home and I started, because my first thought was it won't work in my country. And then I was actually arguing with him that no-till can't work in my country. And then he convinced me that, look, just try it. So we tried 4 hectares, and it was amazing what we saw, that even with water retention of the crop. And so we started from there to start to move to no-till. Even our banana plantation is very minimal tillage, where we did only with an earth auger, just the hole. And then we now start working on getting other farmers to embrace no-till, because we've also seen that even in our soils, when we dig up a little soil, the caterpillars and everything is back in there. And truly, the soil is the bedrock. So if we don't focus on the soil, we have nothing to grow on in the future. So we have to maintain the balance.
Absolutely.
And that's something I'm hopeful that farmers in Africa will understand, that we have to regenerate what we have, because without that, then we have nothing really.
Fantastic. Yep, the importance of soil health. I mean, Marcus, you have a perspective as well. I mean, obviously in Germany or across Europe and many parts of the world, these are very, very important topics for people, particularly consumers and other stakeholders in society.
Yeah, so that's, for us, yeah, the soil is important, but we're in an area with a very good soil. We work in our area many years with livestock farming, so we give a lot of organic matter from the manure, from cover crops to the soil. But in our area, we have most of the field are surrounded from trees. There are a lot of spaces which giving back to the nature. But also we are fighting with the rules in Europe and especially in Germany. So it's making it hard to give back something for nature, because in the next year comes the government and says, hey, nice. And now it's a special part, and now there's no spraying allowed. So that's farmers 5 years ago do great things for nature, and now they're getting new rules from the government. So that's everybody's taking, okay, it's hard to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe that kind of takes us to another area. I mean, again, sort of diving into the areas that we talked about in the Farmer Voice. We sort of talked a little bit about weather, we talked about climate, we talked now about this sort of balance of nature. I mean, you know, another one is kind of the complexity, right, of dealing with a lot of change and a lot of, I mean, all industries have regulations, but farming obviously as well. Some of the other things that farmers in our survey cited were major concerns on their minds, things like costs. So when this survey was conducted, this was April. I think things like fertilizer costs were particularly high. Energy costs, we've seen those spike recently. So price volatility was a big issue. Weather volatility, extreme weather. What are some of the biggest concerns, do you think? Let's take aside the weather that we talked about and the climate change patterns that we talked about. What are some of the other things that worry you on your farms right now? And let's start with you, Scott, and then we can go to Pedro on that one as well.
I think the biggest thing for us is balancing economic sustainability with the environmental sustainability goals that we have as an operation. And so you mentioned, fertilizer being top of mind and a concern for many of the farmers in the survey. We as an operation have made it a goal to try and reduce, or if not completely replace, anhydrous ammonia as one of the main sources of fertilizer for the crops we grow, because we think and feel that it's better for the environment if we can use alternative sources. When fertilizer prices are at an all-time high, like they were when the survey was taken, it's easier because the alternatives were cheaper. Now, if you take today's prices and where those have been cut in half, now maybe the old way, for lack of a better term, is cheaper than some of the more sustainable solutions that are out there. And so how do we balance that over time? How do we weigh those decisions as a farmer and as a business person when we're making our crop budgets and trying to decide what production practices to implement on our farm? And so that's a very specific example, but I think we have those decisions to make at multiple points in our cost structure and in our crop budget. And so for us, there is a concern around implementing the environmentally sustainable practices that kind of align with our convictions around being regenerative in our approach and taking advantage of that, but at the same time understanding the cost structure that is not necessarily something that we get to choose, but more something we have to manage through. And so every year it's different, and we've talked even last night over dinner just about the systematic approach that it takes for all of this, and not one year will be the same, but at the end of the day, our goal and our passion is still true through it all.
Thanks a lot, Scott. And maybe Pedro, jumping off from that, because I mean, this idea of it changes. I mean, the price volatility changes regularly. I mean, I think you maybe have a reflection on that also from the perspective of Argentina, where that's been quite extreme.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with Scott. Price is quite an issue. You have some tools with future prices, but they are not common in farmers. No, little amount of farmers use those tools. But I want to focus on innovation and technology. I think that is an issue for us. We know that we need to improve productivity, being sustainable, and the balance of that is important. So we are all in the same boat. So I want to thank Bayer, because Bayer is a good provider for tools for us to be more sustainable and profitable at the same time. No. And sometimes we have some problems. For example, there are a lot of sensors and things that can help us to grab the data. But, for example, we don't have connectivity. So it's connectivity, in all the farm. So it's quite a problem. So we are dealing with all these issues, and our head is like a mess.
Yeah,
most of the time.
That's indeed a challenge, right? I mean, many of these things, like many industries are going through this digital transformation, data becomes just an important asset on the farm as any other tool. And to your point, you kind of need the infrastructure around you to make that work and enable a lot of these systems. So some things that, farmers themselves aren't going to be able to solve. And I guess, patience, I mean, when you think about the smallholder context as well, sort of access to some of these tools. I'm imagining that, farmers in some of the countries that you're familiar with, that you work with on a regular basis, aren't going to have access to the same technologies that other parts of the world have.
Yeah, absolutely. The challenge, I think, for us is just to be able to access some basic things. So starting from even mechanization for no-till is something we struggle with. But I think, also the fact that the issues are so, they're kind of moving around real quick. And so with inputs, for instance, I'll talk about fertilizers as a starting point. The price of fertilizers have always been a challenge for farmers in Africa. And so we are probably the most under-fertilized farmers in the world. And so currently, for instance, I'll say the price of corn is at an all-time ever high of $600 per ton. In a country where minimum wage is still $30-something dollars per month, $30-something dollars per month. And the price of the most staple commodity is $600, a factor of the cost of input. We're very, very import dependent for everything. So everything has to come in. And we are also struggling with currency issues like in Argentina. So the Naira, for instance, slipped from about 450 to the dollar about this time last year. We're now 930 to the dollar. Everything is dollar-based. So for the farmer, technology, innovation that quickly enables farmers to do more with less is so vital, never more now than before. And so even when he talks about biological, Scott, these are so vital because I say that in Europe it's an option, or in the US. For us, it's a solution. So if you have a biological that costs me $10 or $15 or even $30 per acre, against how much does it cost me per acre to fertilize, that most farmers don't even do in the first place. So many farmers will plant a crop and not be able to fertilize because they can't afford it. And so they'll just leave it to chance. So this year, when the price of everything has gone up, the dollar's gone up, fuel subsidy was taken out, so we went from about 100 and so let's say about 50 cents per gallon to triple that. The cost of even moving the inputs around is ridiculous now. So I think that this is the time when innovation needs to come, all the tools together to actually quickly enable us not have a major food crisis in the most populous parts of the world.
Fantastic patience. You brought us to the point there. We were painting a picture of the challenges. Let's pivot the conversation then into the space of solutions, right?
Yes.
You touched on it, Pedro, Scott, you all have as well. But let's just take a moment then. I'd love to hear from all of you when you see companies like us. I mean, we're not in the business of just innovating for the sake of innovation. We are trying to deliver innovation that helps our customers, our farmers, achieve their objectives and their outcomes, be those economic and also environmental outcomes that they need to drive against with an overall goal of food security. So what would be some of the most important innovations and solutions that could come to you, could get delivered to you? What sorts of things are you looking for from companies like us? Pedro, broad palette, huh?
Lots of things.
Your wish list, let it start here.
Yeah. You know, precision agriculture is quite a thing to put exactly the amount of inputs in the kind of soil that you have in that precise point is more efficient to the environment, to everyone. So all the tools that can bring us more data to be more precise on the amount of inputs that we must put in that exact point, that will be great for us. Of course, genetics, we need more yield, and genetics is a big driver. It's an amazing driver. There are new breeding techniques. There are a lot of tools that need to be there. Science must be in the table. So we must work together, because we as farmers see every day the problems. So this is great for us to have this bridge, to know what are the questions, what are the worries of you in the cities, wherever, with the companies and the farmers working together. I'm sure that we can make a better world for the future.
Fantastic. So some really important things that you mentioned there: precision agriculture, helping farmers use fewer inputs to get better outcomes on the fields, on the land that they're farming. Also, genetics, very important. Maybe, Scott, I'm thinking about the story you told about your farm, the experience that you had with the derecho, and what sorts of things can you usefully have that help you kind of deal with that? Maybe it's the wind events, maybe it's also drought and other of these extreme weather factors that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think when we think about innovation through the crops that we're growing, anything that allows them to be more resilient in the face of more volatile weather patterns, as well as, the perfect example from the derecho for us is, we had a corn crop that was completely flattened, but yet, the crop that we were able to pick up off the ground still yielded better than what our farm's average yield was even 5 years ago. So if you think about just the research and development and investment from the business partners that we work with to allow us to still pick up 185 bushel corn, flat off the ground after a wind event like that, it's quite incredible. And to me, that shows just how resilient that crop is. And so the more we can invest in that and see those innovations come to us as farmers, the better off we'll be. I often think about, we're farmers, right? And so we use tools to fix things. The more tools that we can have available to us, the better. And at the end of the day, with the data innovations and the monitoring technologies that Pedro discussed, I think it only will help us to not only produce more, but do it in a way that meets the demands of the consumer on the sustainability side and the food safety side as well.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned a word earlier on that I just want to unpack a little bit. You talked about systems and how important it is to have sort of systems approaches. And, sometimes at Bayer we talk about how, data, yes, digital tools, digital platforms are a way to kind of create the glue between some of the different tools in the toolkit, be they on the biology side, be they on the chemistry side, bringing it all together. I mean, is that it's a reality in terms of how you're farming today already? We're
experiencing that in many different ways. And when you think about precision agriculture and how we are now able to use a prescriptive-based approach that takes into account multiple solutions. So speaking to that systematic answer or solution we talked about there, just like you would go to the doctor to get a prescription to target a specific ailment in your body, we have specific prescriptions that work for the soil types that we're growing crops on. And with the data and the innovations around it that we're experiencing as farmers now, no longer are we doing that on a crop-wide decision or even on a field decision. It's on a 1 acre decision or even sub-acre in certain things. And so to have the technology available to us to take a multilateral approach to growing crops is incredible. And I think that truly speaks to what's unlocking additional yield from whether it be genetic side or product innovations that have direct impact on just a portion of the field versus a broad-based approach.
Excellent, thank you. Marcus, I mean, obviously, you mentioned it earlier on, the realities in Europe, there are maybe somewhat more restrictions on some of the technologies that your colleagues are using elsewhere, but digital, highly important. Are you also interested in, there's a recent sort of shift on this conversation around gene editing, for example? That was one of the questions in the online chat. How do you feel about that? Does that have potential?
Yeah, that's a little bit stupid. We have so many high-tech machinery in Germany. We have sprayers that can detecting the weed, and for that we need modern pesticides. And we have planters who works very accurate. But for fighting against the climate change, the rules of what comes out from the climate change, we need modern seeds. And without modern seed breeding, without CRISPR-Cas, there's no chance. So we need it fast. So and it's so stupid that people stay there and say, hey, we want to fight against climate change, but no modern pesticides and modern seed breeding. No, that's not allowed. So that's, for me, it's totally stupid. So if we want no-till and if we want minimum tillage, we need that.
Absolutely, yeah, makes good sense. Patience, you kind of already touched on some of the technologies, but I mean, listening to your colleagues here, I mean, is there anything that you would build in terms of, what the needs of farmers in Africa are? I mean, there's huge potential, right?
Absolutely. I'm sitting at the headquarters of Bayer. I think that if I was thinking about this conversation without having seen what it looks like on farms like Scott's or Pedro's or Marcus's, I would say this is like Star Wars, right? Technology for the very far future. But I think that what I would say would be like, and I always say this, right, every chance I get, is that companies need to look at Africa from a very, very strong business perspective, to say that if you have the most number of farmers in a certain place, it's a good and huge customer base, not from a give them aid or grant point of view. And to see that if we really want to fight world hunger, we have to empower those farmers to become more efficient and grow more food per hectare. And so innovations like, for me, I would say biologicals, being able to bring modern technology in seeds, because we do have laws in Africa, and the truth is we're pushing hard to create the enabling policy environment for these innovations to come. And so in a country like Nigeria, where there's a law that supports you to bring in a GM or gene-edited crop, I would say that it's the time for companies to push innovation, science, to these markets in Africa where we really do have a great need. And I say also that we don't copy and paste, so we don't bring what is working in Argentina. These guys are light years ahead of us, right? But you bring tailored, talking with farmers is very vital, right? So you can tailor the technology to the needs of the farmers at that time in the different countries where you can make the most out of whatever innovation or technology you're bringing.
Fantastic, thank you. This is a great conversation. Looking at questions from the chat, I promise, I'm taking them here on my phone. There are so many great questions coming in. I'm going to suggest we do we click through some of them. So I'm going to throw a few questions to you and see who feels they want to step in here. So here's a good one. Do you feel you're being rewarded for sustainable farming practices? What kind of feedback have you received from customers or community and from decision makers? So this is the idea of, the incentivization of improvements in farming for more sustainable outcomes. Are the incentives in place? Do you feel like the conditions are the right ones, and are people recognizing it? Go ahead, Pedro.
I just want to say that maybe it's not, we're not monetizing that, no? But the reward is with my soul and with my kids. No, I know that we are in the right road. The market is still not paying for what we are doing, but we know that this is the only way that we can go to the future. So it's the only road.
Yeah.
We're lucky to be in an industry where environmental outcomes tied to sustainability are aligned with what we want to do to raise crops on the farm. If we take care of the soil, we raise more crops, or the yield is better. And so for me, while I agree that there are additional ways that we could monetize or receive more incentive for certain practices and ways that we are doing it, there are baseline strategies and production practices that we do without additional payment, just because it still is aligned with creating safe and affordable food. And so that's encouraging to me, sure. Even though I know we're all in an industry, or a time in our industry, where carbon credits and payments for different things are still trying to be solved or figured out. At least the farmers are still aligned in wanting what's best for the soil.
Absolutely. Maybe a related one. What are the main challenges you or your peers are facing in implementing regenerative practices, and what would help you to adopt them? So regenerative practices in the sense, we're looking here at the outcomes, right, across soil health. Probably similar to some of the things that we've already discussed. Anything specific around?
For me, it's funny because we've been doing regenerative agriculture for 30 years. So it's just our life.
Yeah.
So that's a new keyword at the moment. Everybody talks about it. But for farmers, yeah, cover crops, soil health, it's important since many years ago.
Yeah.
So that's...
So these concepts, the focus on soil health, the focus on that as an outcome of farming and as a key kind of asset that you're protecting, cover crops being the idea of kind of putting crops in between the main row crops to kind of help improve the soil health and the soil quality, some of which can also actually be a cash crop as well for farmers, right, too, along the way. Here's a question that I really like, and then I'll take some questions from the room, by the way. So please, if you've got a question, please raise your hand, and one of our colleagues with a microphone will come to you. But one of the questions that I saw in the chat, which I liked very much, was farming often seems distant to consumers. If there's one thing you'd like consumers to know and take away, what would that be? And how do you think we can better educate consumers? I mean, this is one that I admit in our profession we think a lot about. How can we improve this connection? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think that if the consumers can understand, and the farmers can understand, that we all have a common goal, right? We want safe, affordable, clean food. And so we're all working towards the same thing. At the end of the day, we may have different ways to get there, but if we can find that commonality and do it in a supportive way versus what I think at times has become too combative or too divisive around certain views on things, whether it be on biotechs or pesticides or different things like that. At the end of the day, we're not going to produce something that we wouldn't feed to our own children. And so I think that don't forget that. If you're the consumer, don't forget that we have families that we're trying to feed with these same solutions as well. And so if we can start there and then have a more focused discussion around what strategies get us there the fastest or the most efficient, then all of a sudden I think a lot of these innovations will be unlocked and easier to implement.
Great answer. Any other perspectives on that consumer connection?
Take into account that I used to say that my kids sleep meters away where I spray glyphosate, for example. No, we know what we are doing. Good agricultural practices is the key issue. What I love most is there, and that they sleep meters away when we spray. So we need you to know that.
Yeah.
No, the most important thing for us is there, and we are dealing with that. So science should be always over the table, and we need to speak more. So this is great to have you here. We can hear your worries, and we can tell you what we are doing. This is great for us. Thanks, Bayer, for this.
Great. Another one that seems to be of interest for folks online is very much this idea, okay, we're hearing that you've got lots of regulatory changes, lots of policy changes, lots of new technologies. You're also experiencing some of the same challenges in different areas in the world. So how does best practice sharing work across your industry? How are you doing that? And is it really helping farmers even, given the conditions are so different, right? We've heard that as well. So is best practice sharing something that you can explain to us a little bit? How are you doing that? And then also, is it helpful?
I will jump in right here.
All right.
So I am one of the most blessed beneficiaries of peer-to-peer knowledge transfer. So, and I advocate for this everywhere. So I'm a member of the Global Farmer Network, and farmers like Pedro. So basically farmers who have, thousands of hectares and farmers who have 2 hectares. And so we are getting the kind of support so extension service in my country is really challenging. And so even with just being able to do no-till, so I can talk to a no-till legend by phone, by email, and they'll tell me, look, this is a system. It takes time. It's not a quick fix. You go, you do this today, you do that tomorrow. Or my bananas are falling down and I'm phoning someone else in India and I'm saying, look, this is too many bamboo sticks to keep them up. And he's saying, look, just tie ribbons. Take ribbons, tie this one to the ground, and that's it. And for us as farmers, that's really, really vital, right? So if I buy a product from Bayer and I have support from someone who is using it somewhere else in the world, he can tell me, look, it's too hot there, this isn't working for me, or so that's like really vital. And so recently I'm helping to do that more in Africa for the Global Farmer Network as the regional lead for Africa. And it's all about knowledge transfer from farmers to farmers. And that's really important because we live it every day, right? So you can ask me questions today and I can tell you, because this is my life, this is their lives. And so it's important that farmers help farmers to succeed.
Is that any different anywhere else in the world? Are you doing the same thing?
Yes, my family is members of a peer group of other farms for ideas sharing, knowledge transfer, and it's not always about what production practice is best. Sometimes the conversation is, how do I transition to the next generation, you know, or it's the younger folks in the group chat saying, how do I get my dad out of my hair? You know, there's so many different elements as farmers that we deal with because it's still a business as well as a farm. And so all of the different issues that would face each and every one of you in your business life, we're dealing with as well. Sometimes though, and oftentimes, we have the family dynamic that gets added to it that makes conversations all the more interesting.
Spicy.
Exactly. I can imagine.
I'd like to add, in Argentina, I'm part of APRESID, is the Argentina Native Farmers Organization. We have more than 40 groups all around the country. Once a month, we gather in one farm. We see all the things that are going on that farm. We give our inputs to the farmer. And once in the year, we open this farm to the community to show what we are doing. So sharing knowledge for us is one of our biggest pillars, definitely.
A core part of the work as well. Great. Let me ask any questions in the room here that we can make space for. Gentleman here in the front. Thank you.
Hi, hello. This is Jonas with Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. I just want to ask how your future plans regarding sustainability maybe are impacted by the short-term price changes regarding energy, regarding pesticides, regarding corn or everything, and how that maybe affected your long-term plans in the last few years, because we saw really hard price changes. We see it in the buyer numbers as well. So maybe you can share some more info.
That's a great question. Maybe Scott, do you want to kick us off?
So I think that for our farm, we think of things in terms of generations, not just years. And so we have a goal to reduce our reliance upon synthetic fertilizer. And so as we work towards that on an annual basis, we may adjust the ratios of what is through an anhydrous ammonia form versus a liquid form versus a biological form. And some of that is dictated by the price. But again, we're also at the same time every year testing new products that are hopefully, going to get us to the finish line of where we are reducing reliance upon synthetic fertilizer in the crop budget. So there is a year-to-year change that always is impacted by the economic realities of the time. But because it's a generational business, our goals or our outlook is not dictated just by 1 year. It truly is by generations. And what will the farm look like? We love to host groups and individuals to our farm, and there's an open invitation to any one of you in this room to come to Iowa to see my farm and meet my family. We show in the presentation a picture of what my great-grandfather's farm looked like when he started farming, a second picture right below it of what it looked like when my grandfather and my grandmother took it over, and then what my mom and dad came in and where the farm was. And even visually to see those changes is quite impressive. But the challenge to my brothers and I is, what's the next picture look like? And, you know, if it was a draft horse with my great-grandfather and a modern professional farm shop with a ton of technology, you know, through the third generation to my dad, you know, I think for us, it truly will be maybe a picture of a planter in knee-tall rye, no-till planting into the field. You know, that the first picture was a draft horse moldboard plowing. You know, you think about just how those changes, they don't happen overnight. And so for us, that's the best way I can think of to answer your question is truly, it changes every year, but the goal has not changed for generations.
I bet when you look at those photos, you see the technology is changing, but you also see basically the available land being put to far more efficient use and far more productive use over time.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Let me add that when you take a decision, the systemic approach is there. So the decision is not only impacting the next crop, but the next one and the next one, and the soil, basically. So you have to keep that in your mind to make the decision. So maybe you have this situation today, but this situation is going to change. And you are part of a system. You need to have this in mind always.
Very good.
But for a German farmer, it's a big problem because of our politics. You cannot plan the next 2 years. So we see that the rules changed in a very short term. So you cannot do planning for the next years. And for the next 10 years, there's no chance. So for livestock farmer, they talk so many times about animal welfare, but nobody wants to pay for that. The government says, hey, we want that, but yeah, they're changing the rules, and now we got some money for that. So as a farmer, you cannot invest in that. So that's planning in the future in Germany at the moment. Very difficult.
Fantastic. Okay, so been a really wide-ranging conversation, right? We started with what the day looks like. We started with the weather. We went through climate change. We talked about some of the other challenges on the farm. We talked about innovation, solution systems. I'm going to ask you, if you can, to help me wrap this up for our colleagues in the room today. One of the other things we asked in the Farmer Voice was we asked all of these farmers fundamentally how they felt about the future of their farm and about farming, what their attitude to it was. And I would ask the same question to each of you as well. I mean, how does it feel when you look forward, when you think about what that next photo is going to look like on the wall? You know, how do you feel about that? Maybe we'll start, Pedro, and work this way.
For me, it's amazing. I know that we are part of the solution. We are living in the exponential area. So we have all these new tools, new technology. Being a farmer these days, for me, is great. Sometimes we have challenges, with society, with non-science based organizations and all that stuff. But we deeply know that we are part of the solution, and photosynthesis is great, and we are dealing with that. It's a great future for us there.
Thanks, Pedro.
With a lot of innovation and technology becoming available and hopefully getting to us soon, I'm really, really hopeful. So I'm looking into the future, more optimistic this year than last year.
Great.
So I told to my second son, he's interested to become a farmer. And I told him, okay, do that. Make the normal training, what's in Germany normal, studying agriculture, and then you can look. You can produce food for Germany, but maybe not in Germany. So at the moment, I'm struggling with the rules. So I think the next generation can do farming, and they are interested in farming. But when the rules becomes more and more difficult for them, it makes me more sense to go to other countries.
Very interesting perspective. Thank you.
To me, the future of farming it's an exciting landscape. As a young producer, to see the bar to entry in farming, right, is only getting harder and harder, whether it be due to consolidation or just the rising costs of getting into farming. It makes it hard for young people to come back to a family farm or to start, who's going to be the next first generation farmer. I think it is harder today to be that than what it was when my great-grandfather started. However, innovation in our industry is at its highest. And to me, that is what gets me the most excited about where we can go and what solutions will be available to us as producers. And so the more that we can lean into that and experience that, the better off we'll be. I think the difficult part, it was in the quote actually in the video, is can the consumer be patient enough for us as farmers to actually implement the new innovations that come? We're driven by consumer demand in every industry whether we're a consumer or as the producer in this scenario. And so for me, it's 365 days for each crop year. There's a lot of industries where innovation happens daily. We tested indoor agriculture on our farm, and we were making changes to the algorithm or the program, on a daily basis that was monitored off of every 10 minutes, getting new data. When you plant a seed of corn in the ground in Iowa, you're going to know the answer of if those tests were right or if what you were trying, that new innovation is 6 months later. Then you'll wait through a winter period and then try it again. And so we are limited as to how fast we can meet some of the demands of the consumer. I just hope that they can see the common goals that we all, again, the theme I think of all of this is that we do share some common goals. And so if they can be patient enough to truly let the farmers of the globe truly accomplish what they want. Because I think we can do it. It will just take a group effort.
Fantastic. So thank you. That's a great note for us to end on. Thank you for that, and thank you all for your perspectives. It's been genuine pleasure to hear from you and hear your voices as well, in addition to the other voices that we have in our Farmer Voice survey. So much thanks and appreciation from our side. Thank you. Thank you. So at this point, we're going to take a break for about a good 15 minutes or so. So feel free to, in the room, step outside, stretch your legs, etc. For those online, we will be starting again at 5 to the top of the hour. So 10:55 or so, there'll be a timer. Welcome back, everybody, to the second part of our agenda this morning for our Media and Stakeholder Day here at Bayer Crop Science. We were talking earlier on this morning about the Farmer Voice, hearing from the voices of farmers who came to join us here and share their perspectives. And I know it gave me a lot to reflect on in our short break around the stories they tell, the multi-generational nature of farming wherever you are in the world. That is always a little bit the story that we're passing on these farms from generation to generation. And I think that is a great motif for the second piece of the conversation that we're going into, how you manage the different interests and needs, sustainability, innovation, etc. So we're going to shift perspectives a little bit, and I'll come over here and join our panelists for this second panel. I'm going to hear from stakeholders and others who are working with farmers and are working really across a global stage to represent the interests of farmers. And I'm going to introduce our panelists in just 1 minute. We're going to talk about the challenges of today and the opportunities for tomorrow as we look at a future which is more regenerative, more sustainable for farming. So I'll begin introductions here on my immediate left with Yo Kotsuji, who joins us from the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group, where he's the head of the Africa Agribusiness, responsible for investments that support and scale up ag operations across the continent. So thank you very much indeed for being with us and joining us. Next to Yo, we have Doa, Senior Counselor at the World Trade Organization in Geneva. Doa is in charge of external relations and outreach for the WTO's Agriculture and Commodities Division. Doa Motal, thank you for joining us. Great to have you. Next to Doa, Kip Tom, who's the chairman of Tom Farms, a 10th generation farming operation based in Leesburg, Indiana. He's been working on behalf of agriculture on a local, state, national, international levels for many years, and in 2019 was appointed the US ambassador to the United Nations Agencies for Food and Agriculture, bringing a very interesting and diverse experience and perspective. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Kip. And then finally, Frank Terhorst, who is Bayer's head of strategy and sustainability for crop science here in Monheim. And his role is really about bringing the long-term business and sustainability strategies for Bayer in crop science to life, benefiting farmers, consumers, and the planet. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As with the earlier panel, we're going to have time for questions. So again, if you have questions in the room, please raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you. And then also online and on the chat, please keep your questions coming. It's great to get those. We'll read them out as they come. So to start the conversation off, let's start with a quick icebreaker here. And a bit of a quick fire round. So reflecting on the farmer panel, the insights and experiences that our farmers shared, maybe one thing that sort of surprised you, stuck with you, was interesting, particularly interesting for you, and then maybe a need that you also identified in those conversations as well. And I'm looking at you, Yo, so let's start with you here.
Thank you, Tom. So actually, I'm a son of a rice farmer back in Japan, less than 1 hectare. So actually, the comment, the soil, Scott, Pedro said, soil is given by ancestors, and then you take over to your children. That's really how I was also grown up. And I also synchronized when patients talked about how she adopted to regenerative agri, because I'm also like a conventional farmer, no? And then you don't till the land, you cannot believe it, right? And then I lived in Kenya, so a Kenyan farmer told me, okay, this is zero till. And he gave me like a steel stick. And then he said, okay, yo, push it down to the earth. And it really went into the soil. That's how soft soil can get. So I remember those my conversion days. So I only hope we can provide lots of tools, but also a culture, mental shift, how more farmers can adopt those practices. Thank you.
That's great, Yo, thanks. Let's go straight to you, Dan.
I guess what struck me in the first panel was the extent to which farmers from across different continents want to connect. There was a farmer from Africa, from Latin America, and so on. And that connectivity is what the World Trade Organization is about and what it strives to do. It's to connect businesses across the globe, because to produce a good, you need to buy other goods. You need to buy a lot of other goods. You need to buy the fertilizers, the pesticides. You need to buy all sorts of machinery, etc., to do agriculture. The WTO makes that possible, makes international trade possible in an orderly and organized fashion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Doa, for that perspective. Kip?
Yeah, my answer would be more around, these are family people. They're humans. Many of them have been in agriculture for generations. They support stewardship of the land, the environment. They want to work within our planetary boundaries. They know at the same time we need to increase global productivity in order to meet the challenges of the future. And we know that agriculture is a part of economic development anywhere you go in the world. I've seen it across Africa and the Middle East, and it's certainly across Europe and the United States. And unless we give them the tools, the innovation, the technologies to do that, we won't meet that challenge. So I can tell there's a passion in their hearts. I know I'm a 10th generation farmer. We've been in the United States since the late 1600s. This is all we do. And it's about the next generation. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for those opening thoughts. And Kip, again, picking up the idea of generations farming. I mean, obviously, that means we need progress, right? We need to help farmers continue to advance and make progress on multiple fronts. I mean, maybe, Frank, I can kind of kick us off here with the first topic. We talked a lot about the challenges this morning in the farmer panel. In a Farmer Voice survey, some of these challenges that are coming through: climate change, extreme weather, input costs, the costs of doing business, labor issues. We need to balance, right, the challenge and the opportunity to drive forward. What are some of the things that we are maybe thinking about at Bayer to try and help farmers kind of with that conundrum?
Yeah, it was actually quite interesting to see from the survey, but also this morning, that even though the realities for some of these farmers are quite different, depending where they are and which crop they grow, But at the end, the needs or the expectations are actually quite similar. And it's a lot about innovation, so new technology, new solutions, and bringing these innovation to scale. And I think that's where our thinking right now is a lot. And we have been also a bit more outspoken about our willingness to shape also the term regenerative agriculture. And to be perfectly honest here, we have been shying away from this a little bit the past years. But now we really believe we can significantly contribute, and we can also very concretely define the outcome of our solutions, which are more holistic and actually are more tailored. And there are a few things that enable that. So the digital transformation of agriculture is one. So we can be very tailored now. Tom, on your farm, if you use our digital platform, we can basically help you not only for the entire farm or for a field, but actually to the square meter, which is quite important now to really have individual recommendations for that farm. And maybe to finish that, productivity, in our belief, is a very important component of regenerative agriculture, because we heard from Rodrigo and others about the challenges. But we also believe that there is no conflict between productivity and restoring more, because many of these practices, covering the soil, restoring carbon, reducing till, drive soil health, but they also drive productivity. So this is why we are so excited now also to broaden this ambition, and also to help our customers to be also more outspoken and communicate about what agriculture can do beyond food security.
Fantastic, Frank, and we'll come back and we'll talk more about the topics of sustainability and regenerative and the definition and how we get into that in one moment. Let's dwell a little bit longer, if we can, on the challenges space, and maybe get a perspective also from you, Yo, and Doa as well. So when you heard about these challenges in our survey around climate change, weather, input costs, etc., what are some of the ones that you feel your organizations are best tailored to helping farmers tackle?
Okay, yeah. No, it's really the headache is like how to scale, no? And then technology dissemination. And the challenge is like agri-tech dissemination is not as simple as mobile phone penetrated Africa, or now people are using smartphone, because there's a bit of a microclimate, no? Because Doa and I can farm next door, but we can get quite different result, and the views is in detail. And really, it's high-touch model, no? So it's a bit like I teach my mom how to use iPad. No, you have to sometimes sit next door and then talk. So that high-touch model is required. So how you can get there, right? And then also the connecting dots, because, okay, technology is one thing, but connection to the market is another thing, no? And then you produce, how far is your buyer, who is your buyer? If buyer is close, can you do just in time, or you need like a storage because buyer is far? So you need that kind of a linkage. In Africa, sometimes those linkage value chains are a bit broken, no? And then how we intervene is, I think our strength is like a package of investment and then the technical assistance. So I'll give you just one example. No? So in Ethiopia, we invested in like a malting factory, beer ingredient, and then they obviously use like a barley. So after that investment, the client and we worked together with 50,000 farmers around the factory. And then better seed, regenerative agri, those climate smart agri. So we helped them to double the yield. And at the end of the day, we managed to, import substitute maybe 30 or 40 million dollars. Right? It's not a small amount. And then because Ethiopia used to import a lot of malting, but now you can produce more local barley. And obviously that impact trickle down to the farmers, no? And then they can reinvest in new things. So that's like a model we want to replicate more and more in Africa. But my issue is it's like a dots. But it has to be like how do you say in English, like a connected and a more scale.
Network.
Exactly.
And this idea of high touch, that's a lot of investment in terms of kind of joining the dots there and bringing things closer together. And we heard this morning still a lot of technical issues around some of these things, digital connectivity is still a challenge. Before we go too deep into that, though, Doa, I mean, just again from your side on those challenges, where do you think your organization is best?
Right. So a lot of different challenges were raised this morning by farmers, and we could discuss those. Very prominent amongst them were the environmental challenges and the climatic challenges. Now, international trade is fundamental to agriculture, and part of the reason it's fundamental is precisely because of the environmental and the climatic challenge. What many people don't realize is that every time we trade in food, so an apple, for instance, moves from country A to country B, what is being moved is land, water, and energy that are embodied in that apple or in that traded food. From a global perspective, it is vital that we promote international trade in food because we are promoting, in doing so, an efficient allocation of natural resources. It is vital for a country like mine. I happen to be Egyptian. It is vital for a country that has water scarcity like Egypt to be able to import foods that are water intensive rather than to try to grow those foods at home. So from an international perspective, we need to be promoting the flow of food across the globe, looking, of course, at the environmental footprint of transportation, of how we're moving that food around. So we also need to take into account the fact that the climate crisis is progressing and there will be more climate calamities, unfortunately, in different parts of the globe. So allowing food to move from country A to country B to counter those calamities so that countries don't starve is absolutely essential. I always like to say where countries find themselves on the map is no more than an accident of geography. There are some countries that are completely dependent on imported food for their food security, like Gulf Arab countries that import up to 90% of their food. So with the climate crisis and with its progression, that will become an even more serious need. And so we need to be there for each other and to promote international trade in part to counter the environmental and the climate crisis.
An excellent perspective. Thank you so much. And a summary, really, of the WTO's kind of objectives there in that space. I mean, maybe, Kip, I can come to you next. So, that was a very global point of view. You, perhaps from a different lens, also have kind of quite a global perspective, right? If I understand, you're a farmer in 2 different continents, you've been an ambassador, you're a 10th generation farmer in the United States. It would maybe be interesting to hear a little bit from you, your perspective on connectivity and collaboration, right? If we're going to get further here, we're going to need to join across the value chain. We're going to need to join from the consumer right the way through to the farmer, or the other way around, depending on how you look at the value chain. What are, from your perspective, some of the preconditions that we need to kind of make that work effectively, that connectivity and collaboration? And do you have any kind of examples from your past experience or things that you've encountered or been part of where it works particularly well? So maybe a perspective on that space for us would be helpful.
I think for so long we've counted on international organizations to do all the lifting, all the work. We know there's nearly 1 billion people around the world that are food insecure.
Yep.
That number could go up. So what are we doing to support or stand to the side and do what we can as private companies and public entities to get involved to change food security efforts around the world? I mean, we count on the FAO and WFP to do their work, but at the end of the day, it's going to be organizations like Bayer and others that gets involved, that have the intellectual property, that have the knowledge, that have the methods to get this done in a lot of these countries. We need to see economic development occur. But it's going to only happen with the collaboration between the private sector and along with these international organizations. I mean, we've seen it all the time. I look at Africa and you look at the continent, it's got 1.1 billion hectares of arable farmland, but yet it's still a continent that's hungry. And we know that the population is going to nearly double here from 2010 to 2040 or 50, I think the number is. So what are we doing to alleviate that issue? And just relying on what we've done in the past and just counting on UN organizations, international efforts, it's going to take the private sector. Because it's companies like Bayer that's got, like I said, the intellectual property that can make the difference. They can bring that innovation out to make sure that these economies grow and these people can live and improve lives and livelihoods.
That's great perspective there, and linking the work that needs to continue to be done with the public and private sectors together. Maybe we can just jump off from that and go to you, Yo, on, Kip mentioned it, sort of the need still in Africa for continued advancement, access to technologies. There are still many challenges, but huge amount of opportunity there to scale up. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about what your organization is doing there specifically. And in particular, I'm interested in this fine balance that we talked about this morning between sustainability and scaling up production. And how do we make sure that as we do that, as we do one, we kind of take the other with us, if you see what I mean.
I see. Okay, so probably it's yeah. I'll continue to give some example, no, because it's really all about how So we're an investment company, so we basically grow core company, agri company who can connect and buy more from the farmer and then build like an ecosystem, right? It's a bit like there's a big BMW factory and then there are a bunch of SME around and then the whole economy flourish and employment created. So that's really how we do through investment and advisory package. And one example, we haven't talked too much about livestock, so maybe I'll talk about that because that's important income sourcing in addition to cereals. So another example in Ethiopia, so we invested in like a chicken company called Echio Chicken, and they have a quite unique breed. They produce day-old chick, and it's a little bit like a traditional breed. So they don't eat too much feed, but they lay egg much more than like a traditional breed. So that's nutrition source, income source for the farmer, right? And then, most of the places in Africa, we don't eat chicken every day, right? In festive season, you sell the meat and then you get the cash. So that the chicken growth cycle really matches with farmers' needs. And then, so we invested in like a producer of that day-old chick, right? And then, but the pain point was building ecosystem because like if you just sell like a day-old chick to farmer, next day the chick will die. So it's better to like grow like entrepreneurs in the villages who can grow to like 20 days or 30 days when chick, health perspective, chick grows to a little bit stronger state and then sell to the smallholder farmers so they can grow bigger, right? So we provided like a kind of a mini MBA technical training to do about like 1,000 those rural entrepreneurs. And that really created like a distribution chain for this innovative chicken breed. And then that at the end of the day gives like income and nutrition. And to me, it's more like it's because chicken is faster cash cycle than crop or vegetable, right? So that gives like a stable income and also nutrition. I mean, for the next generation, like reducing like a children's stunt or those things are quite important. So probably like a combination of like a livestock and cereal. That's sort of like a thesis we're also chasing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one thing that we heard in other conversations, this idea that it's hard to be green if you're in the red, right? So these things have got to go hand in hand. They've got to obviously build out the capacity for truly economic, successful operations, and then the sustainability work can come hand in hand with that. Maybe then shifting Doa back to you here. When you look across the globe, when you look at the various frameworks that are in place, there is an implication that there's maybe a disconnect sometimes between global policies in the broadest sense and commercial agricultural policies and practices. I mean, do you see that? Do you agree with that idea? And how do you envision kind of bringing what we saw today, the farmer voice, those commercial practices, closer to the policy making, closer to those types of conversations where the broader frameworks and rules get set?
Right. So in the World Trade Organization, we don't see our role as a standard setting body. So we don't tell countries how to do agriculture. However, we provide space for governments to regulate their agricultural sectors, to set standards, regulations, norms, provided that those norms are based on science or based on risk assessment and are not obstacles to trade. We also provide space for governments to use trade policy instruments such as subsidies to achieve non-commercial goals, provided the impact on trade is not distortive. So, for example, in the subsidies area, we allow governments to subsidize their farmers to achieve environmental objectives, to achieve rural development, to improve rural infrastructure, and so on. And all of these are permissible types of subsidies in the WTO that have no ceiling. What we in the WTO try to do is to reduce the measures that are distorting trade. Because, as I said, farmers at the end of the day want to buy and sell. So I would say that that's really what we're about.
And you know, is there, very tactically perhaps, but I mean, how can the sort of the amplification of the farmer voice, how can that be increased? How can, you know, what is the format and the forum for that, do you think?
So the WTO was conceived as a forum that would bring together a variety of different voices. The voice of the producer, but also the voice of the consumer, the voice of civil society. It was also conceived as a forum that would try to reconcile different public policy goals. So not just commercial interests, but also environmental interests, social interests, and so on. And therefore, governments are at the heart of the WTO. The WTO is an intergovernmental forum where governments come to speak on behalf of all of those voices. So the farmer's voice is brought to the WTO through government. However, we also hear from farmers directly through events that we organize, like last week's public forum, where many farmers' organizations came to speak directly to our members, through initiatives that I'm responsible for instance, such as the Trade Dialogues on Food, a monthly program which I run and in which I try to bring different voices to the table, including the farmer's voice. So there are many ways in which we bring farmers to the WTO. And lastly, we also bring the farmer voice to the WTO in the context of settling commercial disputes. Farmers are sometimes brought in as experts to provide their testimony and to give guidance to panelists, our judges, as they resolve very complex agricultural disputes.
Super, Doa, thank you so much. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to go more in the direction of this topic of regenerative agriculture, Frank, that you touched on. You know, we as Bayer were talking more about this topic. You heard from the farmers in the panel this morning, the sense that actually in many ways, their view, regenerative agriculture is something that they have been working on for many generations. It feels very natural. It feels very much of an evolution for them. But for us, you know, maybe you can help summarize what role innovation can play in helping to advance this topic at scale.
Yeah, for me, what resonated here the last minutes, you talked about scale, Josh, you talked about ecosystems, and that's also a lot how we think about regenerative agriculture and you know what we need to achieve, because as we have heard this morning, there is a lot of things that are already happening, and what actually I think we need to do more of is accelerating that and bringing that to more scale. And while you know, we in Bayer we actually touch 340 million acres worldwide with our solutions, that is still not enough to really make a fundamental change and help farmers to really on scale move to a more regenerative agriculture. And that's why, you know, we need partnerships. We need partnerships with, you know, you here on the panel, but with many others. And that's what we are currently building. We have, for example, one really large partnership in the digital space with Microsoft. We have a couple of strategic partnerships right now in the biological area. But more and more we think about partnering with also other large industry partners to really bring more holistic solutions to farmers and make it also easy for them to implement. And that is actually what is happening right now, because there are some fundamental shifts also in technology that allow us or allow the industry to do this now. So one is the digital transformation. which we have been talking about for a bit, but this is really progressing now. And the other one is also really breakthrough advancements in the space of biological life sciences. So we are looking at technologies right now that could replace at least part of the synthetic fertilizer segment. We will see later today that we are working on products that are, have a significantly lower environmental impact, and that is really very interesting to see how this all now comes together. But again, this is something very important. But I think when we meet here in 3 years' time, I think hopefully we will see that agriculture and farmers around the globe will not only make a difference to food security, but they are actually also making a significant difference to solve some other challenges that we have on this planet, such as decarbonization and others.
Fantastic. We did talk about some of those technologies already this morning around biologicals, or even things like covercress and no-till, and how they can be part of regenerative farming practices. But maybe I'll turn to you, Kip. I mean, we, before the panel, were just having a discussion and a conversation about this term regenerative. I mean, you heard our farmer colleagues this morning talking about it and sort of saying, well, it's a term, I've been doing it for many years. What's your perspective, both from a farming point of view, but also somebody who probably listens very closely to the conversations around some of these concepts?
Certainly. So as you look at agriculture, I tend to think oftentimes we think there's one solution that can be played everywhere around the world. And we know that, as I said earlier, the solution for someone in Nigeria, in Africa, it's much different than it is for someone in Denver, Iowa, or someone in Leesburg, Indiana, or someone in Southeast Asia or the Middle East. And so I think we need to let them, who I think farmers are some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, they try to figure out the solutions. They're living there with that soil. They're living there with the outcomes, and they have ownership of what really occurs at the end of the day. So I think when we look at regenerative, we got to look at making sure that we preserve nature. We have less impact on the climate. I look at it this way. We want to make sure our streams, creeks, rivers, lakes, and oceans are cleaner than what they were when we first came here, when we first started farming. We can do all that, but we can only do that if we have the innovations that are available to us today. I'll say this, and I'll say it many times. We need to accelerate the velocity of innovation for agriculture at a much faster pace than what we're doing today. We know there's a lot of policy guidelines around how products come into the marketplace, but this is time, it's game on. And we need to really get involved with our policymakers, the regulatory bodies around the world, and say, what can we do to solve some of these problems? I mean, I've been so many places across Africa and Southeast Asia. I see a child that's been in a displaced camp with nearly 1 million people, and they've been there for 4 generations, some of these people, or been in that camp. There's no reason for that. And we continue to deliver food aid there. I think of all the brilliant minds and opportunities are lost because we're not bringing the policy fast enough to allow us to adapt and bring on regenerative agriculture and bring these products with that innovation to the marketplace.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kip, for that perspective. And indeed, it goes right to the heart of a question that came in online. Farmers said they don't see barriers to transitioning to regenerative agriculture, or they're doing it, but we know there's room for improvement. What does the system, value chain, development organizations need to do to increase uptake? Is it consumers? How do we move the needle on that one? But I think if I'm listening to you, it's, we need to accelerate innovation. We need to be able to kind of really shift on that front, as well as on recognizing that there is a pull in terms of food security and from the consumer as well.
So let's go back in history here. Let's understand the trend that's taken place here. I'm going to share a really quick story about one man, his journey through agriculture. This man was born in 1928. He was a twin, weighed a little over a kilogram, and they gave him up for adoption. But about a month later, they brought him back. Now, this is during the Dust Bowl in the United States. It's during the Depression. It's during the time when we didn't have the tools on farms. This young man grew up plowing behind a horse on his farm. At age 14, they pulled him out of school so he could weed the fields by hand because there was no crop care products. So he didn't get a chance to advance himself in education. But soon afterwards, we had mechanical cultivation come along. We had the green revolution occur. We had the access to crop care products to make sure we could deal with the pests we're dealing with. Then we had biotechnology. Today, we're into the digital revolution. Digital revolution allows us to understand what's going on our farm at a real-time basis so we can make actions to improve our productivity. Well, this same man not only plowed behind a horse when he was a young child, he got to sit in a cab and ride in a tractor that was being guided by the satellite that was changing the seeding rate and the fertilizer rate across that field. He rode in a sprayer that would only turn on and spraying when it got to a weed. So he saw the productivity gains of this crop right here go from 30 bushel per acre in his lifetime by the time he left us to 240 bushel per acre, so nearly an 8-fold increase. It was only because of efforts like Bayer and other companies that brought these innovations to get us there. I think the next big lever to pull is regenerative agriculture, and it's exciting to be a part of that solution that's coming forward to the industry.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, and I'm assuming somebody close to you that we're talking about, but the lifetime, the linear scale of what has happened during a human lifetime there in terms of the transformation of agriculture.
It was my father.
I figured it. Well, thanks for sharing the story of Tom, Mr. Tom Senior. So let us turn to a question in the room. We have here a colleague. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, it's working.
Okay. Well, Joa, I just wanted to come back to the point you mentioned about ensuring trade flows across the world of agricultural products. Do you think, or are you worried that there's a trend towards more protectionist measures or more barriers, on one hand from the geopolitical environment that we have? I mean, most recent, like very recent case, the measures that Poland introduced vis-a-vis Ukraine. And then on the other hand, the question, how do countries ensure sustainable production practices without having leakage effects? Their production goes elsewhere. How can they protect that without imposing too much trade measures? So I was just wondering, what's your take?
That's an excellent question. Of course, protectionism is a concern, and higher trade barriers are a concern. But my personal belief is that globalization will continue, and that it is unstoppable. And it's unstoppable because we are so interconnected today that there's no way to reverse that, nor should we reverse that, because we are in a world that is so complex that we need to be relying on each other and helping each other. Countries need to see each other as friends and to step in for each other in moments of need, climate calamities or otherwise. We are at a complex geopolitical moment. We've seen the suspension of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We're also straight out of a pandemic that has created enormous global supply chain problems, including in the area of food and agriculture. And yes, there is a worry that protectionist measures can be on the rise. I think that that is a temporary phenomenon because I don't think that our interdependence can be stopped. The most immediate problem that we're dealing with now is the problem of food export restrictions. So believe it or not, when most people think of trade, they think of countries wanting to sell, but sometimes countries don't want to sell. In fact, they want to keep their food at home. And that's one of the biggest problems we're facing in the World Trade Organization today because of the COVID pandemic, the war, where countries have a tendency to want to hoard their food and to keep it at home to make sure that their national food security is preserved. We in the WTO are trying to say that is the opposite of what should happen because countries need to know that they can rely on international markets and on the global trading system to find food. Once that credibility of the multilateral trading system is tarnished, countries will revert to even more protectionism to try to subsidize domestic food production, as inefficient as it may be. So we have to continue to fight export restrictions.
Absolutely, and I think that's, again, a theme coming through in a lot of the questions online is kind of how do we counterbalance this sort of fragmentation and really push for more global approaches here, both on the policy side, but also on access to technology as well. That's another important thing. I don't know if that's something that you want to say something about as well.
In fact, on innovation, I think it's important when we trade in food that we realize that we're also trading in ideas. And in fact, that happens with international trade in any kind of product. With the movement of things, there's the movement of ideas. And the WTO is also about the movement of ideas and the movement of people through the General Agreement on Trade and Services. We need to allow all of these things to move for agricultural innovation to happen. Just last week at the WTO Public Forum, I was told that an agri-food company wanted to meet me. I sat down with them and they said, we want trade to be liberalized in, and I was waiting for them to say apples, oranges, etc. And they said 3D printers. And I said, well, what is your line of business exactly? And they said, we are 3D printing biscuits and chocolate, and we want those printers to travel. So in the WTO, the anchor for agriculture is not just the WTO agreement on agriculture, but it is the entirety of the WTO rulebook, because industrial products, just like services, are vital for agricultural innovation.
That's a great example from sort of the broader food chain. Maybe gives us a jumping off point for another question that came in through the chat here, which is when you think about the transformation of agriculture specifically, and an open question to all four of you, and feel free to chip in. When you think about the transformation of agriculture, which countries, or which regions maybe, which countries are really leading that transformation, do you think, and why? What can we learn from some of these areas in the world? Let that question float and see who feels ready to step in and speak. Doa, are you going to kick us off again?
Well, I think food systems are being transformed everywhere, but what I love is the transformation that I'm seeing in Africa. And one of the episodes of the trade dialogues on food that we just held was called The Disruptors, looking at African tech giants who are revolutionizing African agriculture through applications that are allowing transportation systems to work more efficiently, banking systems and finance for farmers to work more efficiently, and a range of innovative solutions that have left me almost incredulous. So I think artificial intelligence and information technology contains a promise that we must absolutely help move along, because it can transform agriculture.
Absolutely. Okay, so AI in agriculture as well. That's a great point. Any other reflections from yourselves on the countries, the regions that are leading the transformation of ag, and why?
Yeah, I also vote for Africa, because if we really see population map, next 100 years, like the continent will probably have a 1/3 of the global population. And maybe like this is like a window of opportunity people are recognizing. We experienced like a supply chain disruptions through COVID and war, and then people are really recognizing, okay, we really have to import substitute, and lots of attentions, and then kind of external supports technologies are coming in. And I agree with Doa. I mean, tech is quite great. Like Kenya has the best mobile money system, and that's really help farmer. No, you don't have to really put cash and go into Matatu and then travel. You can just, it's make everything safer. Farmer can easier purchase things and make savings as well. So lots of things are happening.
So that leapfrog to mobile communications is also really helping to accelerate the change in ag. I mean, Kip, I don't know if you want to come in on that one as well. I mean, you've got a perspective, I think, for certainly North America and Latin America too, right?
Yeah, I'll talk about the world. That was my role. But, we know one thing for certain. A nation's sovereignty and its power is based upon 4 key elements: military, economic, diplomatic, and informational. And that's any country you go around the world, food security, that's what they look at. But then now today we look at, we say it's not just those 4 key elements. It's food and it's energy. And if you don't have access to that, as Vladimir Lenin said, every society is only 3 meals away from chaos. So this is where I say, when I look at where tech is happening the fastest, yeah, the U.S. is on a fast curve up. There's no question. We've got connectivity. We've got access to the technologies, the innovations. Farmers, when they make profits, they invest back in. But where it's really ramping up fast, who deserves a lot of credit, it's Africa. But we need to double down on Africa and make sure we help them.
Excellent. Frank, I mean, maybe kind of twisting the question a little bit for you as well. You know, when you think about what we do at Bayer, I mean, obviously we've got a global business that we're running here. We also spend quite a lot of time, effort and energy thinking about Asia, thinking about the APAC situation. We have a lot of conversations more recently about things like direct seeded rice, but also things like our work on the ground to kind of further ground up innovation and ideas that are coming from farmers to help farmers. Maybe you can share a perspective on that.
Yeah, indeed, because I would have actually not voted, but mentioned APEC, and in particular, I just recently had the pleasure to visit Indonesia. And indeed, what is happening there is basically two things. One is that leapfrogging of certain technology evolutions. Now drones are really an important element there for seeding, but also crop protection product application with tremendous, efficiency gains, but also safety gains. So that is quite fascinating to see. And at the same time, I mean, we are also talking about societal innovation, so really business innovation. And one really very impressive example is a partnership that we have with other industry partners, but also with the World Bank and other institutions, where we create centers in very rural areas without commercial reach until now. And these Better Life farming centers, they help farmers to get access to, first of all, credit, markets, and in between technology and advice. And it's just so fantastic to see if this all comes together in a village that formerly didn't have access to that advice and technology. And I think this is where agriculture and society really comes together. And this is very good to see. But again, for this, it needs partnerships, it needs organizations, companies come together. And then actually we can, again, and you mentioned that as well, Cap, we can reach scale. And then we can scale this up even in these smallholder environments. And that's super fantastic to see.
That's great. Thank you, Frank. I want to bring us back to the topic of collaboration. We've got another sort of 10 minutes or so, but I mean, topic of collaboration before we wrap up. I think it would be interesting to hear perspectives from you all at this point. We've kind of covered a lot of ground in this conversation. We've talked about, the role of the public sector. We've heard a lot about the role of the farmer. We've talked about how to connect the dots across that from a global level. We've talked about the importance of innovation. We've talked about regenerative ag. But let's maybe talk a little bit more about this kind of need for collaboration and connectivity. I think sitting here on a panel with you all today, it feels very strongly there is an appetite on all sides for that to continue and to grow. But maybe, how can we go about doing that? What are some practical, useful ways to start thinking about increasing that collaboration to get to a more sustainable food system?
Yeah, so let me try, because it's all about connecting dots. And then I think better life farming, Frank, you mentioned is interesting because that could be core, right? Because technology centers around that, and then there's community farmers, and then that will trickle down, right? And then maybe we could bring in like a private sector crop buyers or local entrepreneurs, or maybe we can bring in local bank to finance that ecosystem with our partial guarantee, for example, right? And then maybe KIP could bring some US technology company as well. And then maybe there might be, as Doa said, there might be like some trade policy things. I fully agree with like importation, because like a spare parts or like a crop protection or like first generation seed, there are certain things initial stage you got to import, no? And then if there's like a tariff or something, also like a World Bank, we have a channel with the government, so we have a chat with like, how we can liberalize those things, and maybe I can get Doa's advice how to negotiate. So that's how, I don't know, we create like an ecosystem around maybe, that sort of anchor farmer support system. No?
Well, that's great, and actually it's leading us very naturally into what I wanted to do anyway, which is I wanted to make the point how, as your final closing thoughts, here on the panel today, how can we really bring these dots together, and how can we, what one thing can we do to help connect farmers with the consumer, with the marketplace, with policymakers. So thanks for kicking us off there. Let's go to Doa next.
So I'd like to end with a note on collaboration.
Yeah.
What I would like to see from where I sit is greater collaboration amongst governments on global trade policy. We need to be opening markets a lot more. We need to be removing the trade restrictions, trade distortions that are unleveling the playing field and that hurt competition on a global scale. One of the wonderful things that we achieved at our ministerial conference last year on the topic of export restrictions was a governmental declaration by all 164 members of the WTO to try to not impede their exports of food to the World Food Programme. Export restrictions were hitting the purchases of the World Food Programme of grain and other things that they needed to deliver to conflict zones and were severely affecting WFP operations. And we managed to achieve that declaration. We are now heading towards our next ministerial conference in February next year, and we want to strengthen that commitment, but also a lot of other commitments to open agricultural markets. And I hope that the farmer voice will act as a voice for opening markets further, that farmers will be advocates for the international trading system because we allow farmers to sell on the basis of a more orderly system.
Fantastic, Doa. I'm going to come to you, Frank, next. I saw you nodding through that one, maybe.
Yeah, I was indeed, because we talked, quite a bit about partnerships, collaboration to the farm and on the farm. But I personally believe that collaboration beyond the farm, then towards consumers, is a very important one as well. And I can share here also that we right now are having a lot of discussions with grain traders, also fruits and vegetable traders and retailers, supermarkets, food companies with a very different quality right now. So that aspect of really sourcing sustainable food or ingredients is a very different discussion now than it was maybe in the past, because all of these companies also made significant sustainability commitments. And now we all feel, and many of us, including Bayer, for the year 2030. And now we see, hey, this is basically only 7 seasons away. So there is definitely a much stronger willingness to collaborate, but also, to reward, right? Because Tom, you mentioned it. For farmers, it's hard to become green if they are in the red. I'll just repeat that. So, and everyone understands this now, and it's not closing and shutting, his or her eyes on this, and that gives me confidence. That again, I'm coming back to that one word, which is scale, right? I mean, we need to scale this up, and I see a lot more movement and willingness to do this now, and that gives me confidence that we really can move in that direction now.
Great, thank you, Frank and Kip. Bring us home here. We started with farmers' voices. Let's end with the farmers' voice.
Yeah, so in the last year I've been to Ukraine. I got it right up to the front line in Kherson, and I met with farmers across the nation and felt what they were going through at that point in time, and understanding how Russia was using that as a weapon of war, restricting their access to move grains through the Black Sea and into the Sahel of Africa. Earlier this year, I was in Sudan, and I saw what was happening there. You see these people that are living on humanitarian aid only on. I met a young child that was inside of a tent, what was his home was sticks and bags, empty bags of grain that he was living in. And we found out that his mother had walked 10 kilometers away to go take care of their 1 hectare of land that they had. His father hadn't been around for 7 or 8 months because he'd been fighting in the civil war in Sudan. And he's left at home alone there, and there's no food. So I take it back to the human level. I think that's where we got to go with this. But the collaboration between companies like Bayer, farmers like us that see these and observe and talk, we need to talk to consumers, but we got to work with everybody throughout the supply chain. This just isn't going to happen on its own in the void of not bringing in the regulators, whether it's in the EU or in the United States or Canada, whatever country it may be. they've got to get involved. They've got to see what's going on around the world and what we do in a very complex environment, working with Mother Nature, trying to produce crops to feed the world. Again, our goal is to improve lives and livelihoods and connecting with the consumer.
Fantastic, Kip. Thank you so much for those closing thoughts, and thank you all to Jo, to Doa, to Frank for your perspectives on the panel this morning. I think that was
just,
great.
Can I just one thing? One
Please,
thing I forgot.
a final thought. Yeah.
No, because one thing I forgot to mention on the collaboration is like a farmer voice and peer-to-peer learning that the patients mentioned, right? Because like the devils are in detail.
Yep.
So like institutions can play around, but at the end of the day, farmer somehow, if there's a platform that small Sudanese farmer can call Pedro and get real advice, I think that will really change the world. But I don't know how to do that in scale.
Wow, that sounds like a good follow-on conversation. Frankly, let's start that conversation here this morning. The seed is sown, and let's see where that goes. But that's a great spirit to share. Thank you, Jo, and thanks all for your questions as well. So thanks to the panelists.
Thank you.
Great. So, and finally, now to wrap up this morning program, and as our panelists, step off the stage here, I'm delighted to introduce another speaker and a final speaker here, just picking up the proverbial baton of the corn from Kip. That's great. Matthias Banninger, who is our Executive Vice President of Science and Sustainability at Bayer. You're based in Washington, Matthias. I think it would be helpful, perhaps, for us to, use your thoughts here to kind of summarize and pull together some of what we've heard this morning. There's been a lot of ideas, all starting from our Farmer Voice survey, starting from the challenges, but then also moving into the solutions and moving into the opportunities. Perhaps you could just give us, from your perspective, you've been watching it all, some of the key things that struck you about some of the conversations that we've been having this morning.
I took this so to speak, from Kip Tom for a reason. There's a 40% probability that this has been grown because there was a kernel of being grown by a farmer in Ukraine last year that allowed the production of this in Europe this year. And I've been at the factory where then the seed was being produced so that it can be shipped. It's south of Kiev, and it was hit by a missile. It was rebuilt. There's now a bomb cellar there, which one of the things I never wanted to visit is a bomb cellar. One of the things I never wanted to do is kind of think about what the right demining machinery would be, but that's the reality we live in. And we also live in a reality where the world comes together in New York this week at UN Global Assembly, and basically people say, well, we wanted zero hunger by 2030. We probably reach 650 million. If this world, under current condition, says that we have 650 million people hungry by 2030, chances are it's more than 1 billion. So what I'm trying to say is we cannot accept that the world is continuing to work with a food system that isn't able to kind of provide food for everybody, because the technology is there and also the tools for collaboration are there. And for us, I think that's what's getting me out of bed, even when jet lagged. And the researchers you will see later today, that's also what's keeping them kind of moving and working on this stuff. And for me, it was really a moving moment in May when I talked to the people who are actually producing the seed that allows us to have this in our hands today, because we take this for granted. And if there's one thing that has changed since the pandemic and with the Russian attack on Ukraine is you cannot take this for granted anymore, not only in a few countries, but in many countries. This is not only true for African countries. It's true for India, now the most populous place in the world, certainly true for China. And I would say, looking at climate change, it's also true for Latin America. We'll have a spring, let's watch that, under El Nino conditions that's really dramatic. So as we don't take this for granted, it's also an opportunity to really make a difference for us.
One thing that strikes me when I think about your own career, Matthias, I mean, you've worked in government, you've worked at Mars, a big food company, now you're at Bayer. We've been talking a lot about collaboration, right, and public and private sector partnerships. I mean, what was going on in your mind when you were hearing that conversation? What thoughts do you have around some of the examples that were shared today? I mean, how can we practically improve and strengthen this collaboration that we're going to need to drive a sustainable intensification of agriculture?
Well, since we talk about careers, you at one point worked at Mondelez, which
That's true. Also
sort of
food industry.
pretended to be a competitor of Mars, but let's leave that for later.
The 3D printing chocolate is something I'm looking forward to. I need to learn more about that.
Well, I could give up chocolate, but I'm not a quitter, so let's leave it there. So I think something really cool is happening at the moment, and that is that we see partnerships across the value chain. So that growers, on the one hand, work with us on the topic of regenerative agriculture, but that companies like Unilever, like Mars, like Mondelez, like Nestle, many others in the food sector, but also often forgotten in the textile sector, now look at partnering with us and the growers and the big collectors of commodities, if you think about Cargill, for example, as one, to really create a collective approach, to not like kind of shower all these farmers with tons of different standards, but really work with them on what is the right way to go, and then scaling it up, rewarding them. And I can see lots of those conversations happening. And to be honest, also the first contracts being signed where we partner with food companies on decarbonizing agriculture. And that's really great. But to Frank's point, we need to speed things up a bit.
Yeah, as that acceleration is needed. I guess when you look at the conversation that's happening around the world, it's heartening to see, as you say, we've got UN Climate Summit week this week in New York. We've got the COP meeting coming up, which has been more and more also a conversation in which the food industry, the agriculture industry, has got a seat at that table. That presumably is, where conversations need to happen around how we co-determine and co-define the future for agriculture and transformation of agriculture. What are your thoughts also here around how we do that? We talked about regenerative agriculture. We talked about the need to kind of continue to work on that definition and on the future of regenerative agriculture. Maybe you can bring those thoughts together a little bit for us and close us out.
Well, I mean, what I find amazing is it took many conferences on climate all the way to the last one in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt to actually put agriculture in the center of the conversation. And that's amazing for two reasons. One, agriculture contributes to climate change. The food system contributes to climate change. And that is a topic we also need to address, and we do that in the way we look at regenerative agriculture. But secondly, because that's the core topic of adaptation. And if we don't manage to slow down our current race out of the climate comfort zone, we are losing roughly 10% of yield, while, and you heard Rodrigo this morning talking about it, we need to increase the production. So it's basically, if we do nothing, we will decrease the production in a dramatic way, and we have a higher demand. So that's going more and more in a direction we don't like. Now, it's good that we talk about it there, but also I think it's not really where the solutions are being found. And what amazes me is that 5 years ago, we brought together a leading company in biology and in chemistry, and we thought that will allow us to shape agriculture. And then artificial intelligence came around the corner. And now you have biology, chemistry, and AI coming together. And what's happening there is much more important what's happening compared to what's happening at these conferences. Because we are now able to accelerate innovation we haven't thought about. Scott talked about replacing the most important chemical reaction in human history. And that is Haber-Bosch, which allowed us to get fertilizer. By the way, fertilizer feeds half of the world population. With what's happening in technology right now, we can replace that chemical reaction with biology. That's a really big deal. We heard that farmers worry about the cost of fertilizer production. Environmentalists worry about the planetary boundary accession, look at water, look at, for example, also greenhouse gas emissions. We now have the chance to tackle something of that magnitude. We didn't have that chance 5 years ago. We now have it. And let me end with something mundane. The fertilizer business is twice the category we are operating in, so the seeds and crop protection business. So if we at Bayer kind of get a bite of that apple, it's also really good business. And I think this combination of really good business and doing something extraordinary is what you'll see, like also when you walk through the laboratories later today.
Absolutely. Well, Matthias, thank you so much for bringing us to a close there with those thoughts and inspirational words. And indeed, for those here in Monheim, you're going to get a chance to walk through and see what we're doing in this combination of chemistry and data AI technologies this afternoon as well. So that's an exciting trip for those here. But for now, I will say thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists, everyone who spoke, and all the people in the room and online who asked us questions. We had several hundred people joining us through various channels online. So I'd like to take this moment to say thank you very much to them for joining us today, and thanks to all of our speakers.